City Council for Wednesday, May 14th, 2008. I'm here with the one and only council member from the 3rd District, Dennis Zine.
God, it's the only.
Thank God. Did you say that out loud?
We're hearing from the city attorney. He's now speaking up. Thank you.
Right, for the official opinion. We have a number of items before us today, 8 items. I wanted to see if we done items 2 and 3, Mr. Zine. Do you have any questions on those? What do you want to say what those are, Mr. Seeley, just real quick?
Item 2 is an ordinance and report from the city attorney concerning to clarify contract bidder certification requirements under the city's lobbying ordinance. The council had asked that this ordinance be prepared, and they've brought this ordinance back for the committee to look at.
Okay.
Item 3 is support for ACR 123 Fuentes, which would urge the governor to act immediately to commence planning for Census 2010.
Okay. Any? If you don't have any comments, we'll do both those on consent.
We can consent.
Okay, so with that, let's go ahead to our commissioner appointment nomination.
Communications from Mayor and City Ethics Commission relative to the appointment of Mr. Paul H. Turner to the City Ethics Commission for the term ending June 30th, 2010, to fill a vacancy created by Robert Saltzman, who resigned October 24, 2007.
All right, well, Mr. Saltzman moving over to his new commission. Mr. Turner has taken the mayor's very strong nomination, and why don't you open up by letting us know a little something about yourself, just for the record. I think I know it, but I'd love to hear it again and your interest in serving this position.
Thank you, Councilman Garcetti, and good afternoon, Councilman Zine, as well. My name is Paul Turner. I'm currently the Community Relations Director for Citigroup, covering Southern California, including Los Angeles County, Ventura, and Santa Barbara. Prior to that, I was the Democracy Resident Fellow for Pro-Democracy Programs for the Green Lining Institute, where I was very exposed and worked very extensively in the area of campaign finance reform and election reform, with the purpose of advancing civil rights and making the Voting Rights Act real and enhancing voting rights and civil rights throughout the United States, and particularly here in California. Very pleased to have my name nominated for this position, as it builds on my experience with making sure that we have a just and democratic society of informed and educated citizens participating equally and fully in the democratic process. And by that I mean that make sure that every vote counts, that we increase participation, and that we make sure that we enhance the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965, and making sure that big money in politics is accountable, and making sure that regular voters and other people can have access and responsiveness from government. And I think this appointment allows me to continue that experience on behalf of the citizens of Los Angeles, and looking forward to playing a role with my fellow commissioners on the Ethics Commission, which we've discussed is very important to maintaining the integrity of our elective offices here in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I want to thank you for the great work that you've done and the way you've distinguished your service in this area. I think you come forward as one of the most prepared nominees for this position that we've seen, certainly in my time here in office. I do have some questions, but since we've been talking with one another, I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Zine first to see if he has any, and then I'll take it from there.
Sure.
Mr. Zine?
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. Yeah, there's a appellate court judge by the name of Paul Turner. Did you know that?
I did know, and we actually share the same middle name as well, which is
Really?
even more freaky.
What's your middle name?
Henry.
Wow.
When I saw this name, I said, I thought he's on the Court of Appeals. I've known Paul for many years, and he's a wonderful man. So when people ask you a question, you could say, I could be. They would know. The Ethics Commission, responsible for making sure politics are clean in the city of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. There's been some issues with neighborhood councils and disclosure of information. The 700 form or another form, if they want to introduce into the record a council number, council file. So the Ethics Commission gets involved in all types of different activities. Mm-hmm. A concern that I have on the Ethics Commission is we all have treasurers. We all have campaigns. And to get to elective office, if you don't raise money and you don't have a campaign manager, you're probably not going to get to elective office. You may have the best name in the world, like Tom LaBonge or similar. I wouldn't laugh at Tom LaBonge, but that's another name that we use in politics. He just walked in there.
Right.
And what happens is they'll do a review of a campaign. And we don't do anything with the money. The money goes through a treasurer, it's received, it's made sure that it follows all the procedures. And then when the Ethics Commission finds something wrong, they plaster the name of the candidate or the elected official, and they don't recognize the treasurer, who's the one responsible, who gets paid to do that job, of accounting for the dollars, make sure it's all done properly. Because if you want to donate, you can't donate in your name and your business name. And if a group does that, then that's in violation. If the treasurer doesn't do their job and check it, it all falls back on the elected official. And the concern I've always had is we don't deal anything with the money. We don't touch the money. The money doesn't come to us directly. It goes through a process. The treasurers get paid. They account for everything. They fill out the forms, turn them in. But when an audit's done, because they audit the campaigns, then when they plaster that, and I've asked this many times, why don't they plaster the name of the treasurer so people in elective office will say, maybe I don't want to go to that treasurer next time. Maybe I'll go someplace else. So if you go to a restaurant that has an A rating, you're going to feel pretty comfortable. You go to a restaurant that has a D rating, you're probably not going to walk in.
Right.
And the focus on it, I've always said, let's tell the treasurers, you're responsible, you're getting paid, and if you make an error, it comes back on the candidate's name or the elected official's name, but there's never mention when it goes to the media about the treasurer who was responsible, who got paid for that activity. And if you could just look into that, I'd appreciate it. And I don't mind them taking shots when we do wrong, but people who are in that same boat, that should also be recognized, that this particular treasurer didn't do what was right. And then candidates will say, I want to stay away from that particular treasurer, that particular fundraiser. Because you have a fundraiser who collects the money, then it goes through a treasurer. So it really goes through twice. And then when ethics does their reviews, these issues come up, and then it's plastered that, so-and-so fined $50 for this or that or the other. But I would just say look into that. So it's all open and all on the record, and if the treasurer's not doing their job, or the fundraiser's not doing their job, then other people will know and they'll stay away from them. Because we really don't have a better business bureau to go check on treasurers and fundraisers. You just go through the process and hopefully someone will do what they're supposed to. And they're all trained. The Ethics Commission has training for candidates, treasurers, et cetera, fundraisers. But I would just ask that you look into that. And I brought this up before, but every time something happens with another audit, it does not seem to be included when it goes to the press, because they do a news release on it, which is fine. But when someone makes an error, I think they should also be included.
Very good.
So I'd appreciate that for the benefit of candidates, prospective candidates, and elected officials.
That's all I have, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Zen. Couple questions. The issue's come up recently about neighborhood councils and what financial disclosure they should have, especially with a new mechanism that allows them to suggest policy or open policy files, which if there are a number of neighborhood councils that want to chime in on suggested policy on Department of Water and Power, or we don't have power over the cable industry anymore, but some other area like housing, that a number of them could, that would trigger a council file. So it's part of the legislative process, and there's been some back and forth. What level, if any, and how would you envision, assisting that we keep that activism going in neighborhood councils, but also then the flip side, some people are saying, well, what if they're an undisclosed interest of somebody out there, a developer puts a couple people on the neighborhood council and they suggest policy that's in there to their benefit, et cetera. We need to know what people's, financial, just as you had to do for this appointment, what their financial links are. How could we address that to keep both the openness and the participation going?
Well, I actually plan on attending the Congress of Neighborhood Councils this weekend. I'm looking forward to it and meeting many of the neighborhood council members who will be there and maybe getting their response to some of this question as well. I recall that when I was on the Project Area Committee with the Community Redevelopment Agency, we had to apply with the Brown Act and some of the other disclosures as well. And I would think that if you have to do that at the Project Area Committee, a PAC, with the CRA for redevelopment, my tendency is to think that you might need to do that for neighborhood council. I'm not really up on the issue. I look forward to getting more information, talk to, I believe it's Bangwon Kim, who is now heading up that effort with the neighborhood councils, talking to him more about it, getting more information, and figuring out what is the best course to take. So I haven't really developed an opinion yet, but just in my own experience, I think if you're ever going to serve in the public, to serve the public interest, there do need to be some disclosure of your interest, if there is any, for being on that council.
Thank you for that. A second area, in the implementation of Prop R, some of the strengthening of ethics laws that are here in the city, there has been some back and forth and some need for clarification, which I believe the Commission is looking at right now, around defining who is a lobbyist. We've had some members of the business community say, why aren't unions registering as lobbyists? We've had unions and nonprofit entities say there's a difference between being hired as a lobbyist, a gun for hire for money, and somebody who is working for a not-for-profit entity, be it a membership organization like a union or nonprofit. We have a current exemption right now for any nonprofits that are working with the indigent, which is kind of an open-ended thing, but that was known kind of as the Bet-Zedek loophole in the past, which is a group like Bet-Zedek, which comes and lobbies the council on behalf of poor folks and policies, don't have to register as lobbyists. In my thinking, disclosure is always a good thing, who is lobbying, but there's also importance of doing some gradation, because we've had some nonprofits, some of whom now have gotten each one of their workers that meet the threshold under Prop R, which is a lower threshold. It's a number of hours that they lobby city council to register, but the financial impact on a nonprofit of having 10 people have to pay the full fee that a lobbyist does to do that versus a lobbying firm which exists with, for that express purpose. Do you have any thoughts on whether there should be some nuance and how we can make sure that those new stricter rules in Prop R get implemented, but not at the expense of people who are doing community work?
I think so. I think there's a difference between nonprofits, for example, who are they lobby for some affordable housing funds because they're doing affordable housing projects, and yet they might be lobbying on one bill like for the year, during the year, or maybe every 2 years they actually get involved in lobbying. Of course, there's some lobbying that nonprofits can do, even though they're nonprofit status. I think it's 20% is the threshold. But going back to the unions and corporations, I think you can view those as the same as I have done in my support of federal legislation in the past, in which we treated unions and corporations the same in terms of their ability to influence campaigns, and I would say that would extend to lobbying efforts as well.
And one of the thresholds just that I've looked at, that I've spoken with the commission staff about, is whether or not you have an entity like whether it's the chamber or a union. Let's say they're sometimes on two sides of an issue. They're both not-for-profit entities that are advocacy and membership organizations, which is different than Coca-Cola, which is a specific company, a for-profit entity. So that as not to discriminate one way or the other, there should be some lower threshold that still tells us who is lobbying, but doesn't necessarily have to have as much money taken from either of those entities, which are not flush with cash in the way that a corporation is. So it's just one thing to flag there. Two last questions. What are your ideas on voter participation and how our ethics system can increase our voter participation in numbers that we're seeing, unfortunately, dwindle?
Absolutely. That's a good question. I think, and that's pretty much my my whole foundation for why I want to be on the Ethics Commission and why I've got involved in this process, is because we have seen a decrease in participation, whether it's in voting. And remember, voting is just the last part of the process. We also haven't seen until recently enough people contribute to campaigns, which has now been kind of offset by the internet. And we don't see a lot of people engaged in enough forum, and there hasn't been enough space created for people to be engaged in issues of importance to the community or in policy in general. So participation involves a lot of ways, also in terms of making sure how policy is made, how the process can be changed, how we can improve our process of elections, how we can enhance overall participation in both at the schools, here at the City Hall, the state level. So, and again, I think that's part and parcel to how we make voting rights real as well in the city and the state. But I think one of the ways to increase participation is to constantly look at ways in which we can innovate the process, how we can look at things, for example, like instant runoff voting that was recently endorsed by the LA Chamber of Commerce, looking at mechanisms like that, which is a way to enhance people's excitement about coming back to the electoral process and being engaged, and perhaps even getting people who didn't think about running before to run, and that gets more people involved in participating. So I'm really interested in the big reform ideas that also go to enhancing and improving the election process overall to increase participation.
All right. We are joined by Councilmember Tom LaBonge, too. I know you're here about that, but do you have any questions?
Real quick, Mr. Zine, thank you, Mr. Garcetti, Mr. President. Mr. Zine was saying about whether there's just the campaign treasurer that comes, but the campaign consultant and the campaign manager should get a briefing. I know if you talk to your executive director, I asked and flirted this idea, because a lot of times, somebody else does something that crosses the line, yet they never have the training, and I think they should have training. And I think it would be good to have regional mandatory training, so not everybody has to come down to downtown, but if there's something on the west end, the San Fernando Valley, the central area, the south end, in some of our regional city halls, it would make sense to do that. And also just straight encouraging people to participate in the process. It's very difficult, very sad that so few people do. I was just thinking an idea, because you have these little logos up there. You get a logo of the Ethics Commission. If you don't vote, you can't complain, or something like that, No, you wouldn't like that, but the truth of the matter is, if your voice is not heard, then there's no action. It's a very tough dialogue. The other thing I would say, because sometimes people are unethical in campaigns, the first piece of mail should go out should be a standard piece of mail that lists all the hot issues that are agreed upon by the candidates, and it says, Tom LaBonge's position on X, Y, and Z is whatever I listed as, yes and no, just so people can't misinterpret your positions, which then that usually runs the campaign. At least the Ethics Commission said a general flyer was put out in the beginning to discuss basic issues. That's just my feeling. But the big thing would be to have training for those involved, consultants, campaign managers, the fundraiser, the chief consultant, and the chief treasurer should all get briefing. Is that what you were saying too, Mr. Zine?
Well, not so much briefing, but when the audit takes place and they find there's an error, that the names of those individuals, the treasurer, the fundraiser, they also be listed along with the candidate.
Well, they also, I would say this, but also they should have ethics
should
training.
train.
They should have ethics training. That's all. Well, thank you, Mr. Turner. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles and in the Valley,
What high school?
Granada Hills High.
A Highlander.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. LaBonge is the historian of the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think.
The fire department? No. Did you ever want to be a fireman?
I did not.
Okay. Mr. LaBonge did.
All right.
No, let's not-
And no, he wants to stop now, but Mr. City Attorney, I did, but I didn't pass the test.
Oh,
Mr. Zine wanted to be a police officer. Just goes to show the LAPD will take anybody.
Before this gets too unethical, I'm going
Mr. City
to
Attorney, you should object to that.
please strike out all their remarks from the record and forward without objection, unanimous support for your nomination, Mr. Turner, from both the members of the committee. So thank you very much, and we
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you in the full council.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Mr. Turner, we'll be in full council this Friday.
Good, we'll see you on
We'll be
Friday.
there.
Okay, thank you.
All righty.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just make a comment for the record so there's no confusion. Mr. LaBonge's comments were as an attendee, as
right.
permitted by Council Rule 74, and not as a committee member.
That's right.
Love that Rule 74. All right, with that, let's take up item number 6 for Mr. LaBonge's
What happened to 4 and
presence.
5?
We're going to come back to that, but Mr. LaBonge is number 6. So.
Want to get rid of them?
Item 6 is a CLA report relative to the city's position on SB 691 Calderon, which would require junk dealers and recyclers to comply with additional record-keeping requirements and new payment restrictions when purchasing scrap metal pursuant to Resolution LaBonge-Weezer-Hahn. Clay McCarter from the CLA's office is here to make a report if you so
right.
wish.
Good afternoon, council members.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
This
Like
is
to hear the
second,
report?
I think.
Second.
Mr. LaBonge would love to hear the report, please.
So, SB 691 is aimed at tackling the problem of copper wire theft, and due to demand from China, India, and several labor strikes in the copper industry, the price of copper has quadrupled since 2005. And so as the price of copper has gone up, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of copper wire theft in the city and the state and the surrounding country as well. So SB 691 addresses current law, which requires dealers to take the driver's license number, the name and address of each person whom the junk is sold, a description of the item, and it requires this information that's already required to be gathered to be sent to law enforcement on a monthly or possibly weekly basis. SB 691 also requires the seller of the copper wire to be paid via check, and they have to wait for a period of 3 days before they can get this check. It also requires the dealer to obtain a thumbprint of the seller, and the dealer must keep this for a period of 2 years. SB 691 was recently amended, and those amendments increases the penalties for the dealers who don't comply with the law. It increases fines to $1,000 for the first offense, up to the third offense, a minimum fine of $4,000. And SB 691 also requires that a person who's convicted for the theft of junk materials to be required to pay the victim for both the value of the property stolen and any collateral damage caused by the act of the theft. And the CLA report, we have looked at, there's two resolutions in this file, one by Councilman Labange and one by Councilman Weezar. And the CLA recommends that you adopt the Labange-Weezar-Hahn resolution because it documents the most current amended version of the bill.
Thank you. I know, Mr. Chair, there are representatives of the city attorney's office who may want to voice some support because they've been working very hard, Mr. City Attorney Delgadillo.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Eric. Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you, Councilmember. My name is Mike Dundas with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. Just the CLA's report covered everything pretty well. We just wanted to point out two things that should be in the consideration. That there's another bill that's going through the legislature right now, AB 844, which is substantially similar to this one. It's passed out of the Assembly and is now in the Senate, almost the exact opposite of this bill. And just to be note of that as it goes through, because if they're both passed, then it's the one that is chaptered last that actually becomes law. The only difference between the two bills really is that they both ask for payment by check. They both ask for driver's license material. The other bill, AB 844, has a savings clause that would allow cities who have stronger protections than what would be required by this legislation to stay in effect, whereas this bill does not have a savings clause. But I think that's actually Senator Calderon, who's the author of SB 691, is going to make that change coming in the future. So,
Should we support both of them or just one of them, Mr. CLA?
I didn't,
Based on the information that the city attorney just...
if they are very similar, I recommend supporting both of them. I didn't research the one in the Assembly.
Do you
But-
believe the man to your left?
Yeah, I do. So yes.
Okay, so let's go. Okay, Mr. President, I
Move
thank
that? That's it? Okay. We'll take that recommendation then. Mr. Zine?
What about questions?
Mr. Zine has some very important questions he'd like to ask.
I don't know how important, but there's some.
They always are important.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who's going to enforce this?
The SB 691,
Yes.
the local law enforcement.
Okay, what appropriations are they going to receive so they can enforce this? And
I'm
who in
not-
law enforcement is going to support?
The Los Angeles Police Department has a commitment, a detective to city property being stolen, working with various city departments, Recreation and Parks, Public Works, and the DWP. Detective Mann, if I believe his name is underneath Captain Billy Williams in that particular division, and would impress even a retired sergeant like you. He could strike that for the
So
record.
you're going to have one detective enforce this for a city of 4 million people? How many junk dealers are there?
I'm not certain of that number.
See, the question I have, I think it's a good law, but without enforcement, it doesn't have a lot of impact.
Right.
And a jurisdiction like Los Angeles that have had a lot of copper stolen from
Yes, it has.
street lights and other places,
Mhm.
the state laws are enacted with no appropriation for personnel. So if you got one detective working this throughout the city of Los Angeles, you got to go to the junk dealers and check, just like we have the pawn shop detail, and we have these laws, but there's got to be somebody go to the junk store, the junk shop, the junkyard.
Salvage yard.
Salvage yard, or junkyard, whatever they want to call it. I thought it was called junkyard. It
Either
said
way.
junk dealers.
Junk dealers, yeah.
Junk dealers. And do we know how many we have in the city of Los Angeles?
I can get that information. I don't have
So
that
say,
right now.
say we have 100, and you got one detective handling 100, just going by and visiting to make sure there's compliance. The concern is, without some appropriation for personnel, it doesn't really mean anything. And a small jurisdiction that doesn't have any enforcement, so maybe we should ask that there be some appropriation for law enforcement so they could actually have someone do the job. While we have one in Los Angeles, I don't know what other jurisdictions have, and I think it's good to have it, but without enforcement, it doesn't do any good. So how do we tag on some assistance to law enforcement? So we mandate, but then we give them
You
some
can,
dollars to
you
do
can
so.
amend the resolution to ask for that assistance.
Some financial assistance, something to give law enforcement so they can have someone Now, a small city, maybe they only need one or two. But a city this size, I would imagine we have a lot of dealers that have to be inspected.
Yeah.
And if we don't inspect it, it doesn't
Right,
have
I
any
would
impact.
suggest that in this budget year in particular, a request like that could kill the bill in the legislature, because they are basically not passing anything that is considered a state mandate that would cause the local jurisdiction to ask for reimbursement.
Not reimbursement. I'm not asking reimbursement.
Or to ask for any kind of funding at all. A revision could soft pedal that request in a way that recommends or suggests that funding be provided to local jurisdictions, but not make it a requirement.
Well, I'm just saying that somehow someone's going to say, this is a great bill, let's do it, let's enact it, because you hear about copper being stolen, and then, so we enact this law, it takes effect. You got one detective in LAPD who obviously can't handle all the yards that we have in the city, leave alone other jurisdictions. And I see, whether it be drunk driving enforcement or something else, there's never appropriation for dollars. Domestic violence, for example. You pass the domestic violence laws, who's going to enforce it? You know, they keep on saddling more and more laws on the law enforcement community, and this is unique because you have to go to the site to inspect. Are they getting the information from the person who's bringing in the metal?
May I assist you, Dennis, in the sense that our Public Works Department, Ed Aberranian, has really been focused on this because it has knocked out a lot of lights in Boyle Heights and Wilmington.
I'm not saying that.
I got it.
Who's
What this is, but once you, right now, they could come in with a box of material and get cash and walk out. This will curb that type of activity. The law is well-written where there will be some challenges to those. If you came in and just wanted cash, you couldn't get it. You have to wait 3 days, you got to get paid in check, you got to get fingerprinted. There would be more of a relationship. So the police department, I think, supports it, and I believe Chief Bratton, who I've talked about this problem, is very interested because he doesn't like to see the broken windows concept not enforced. This is a broken windows concept, which is real important. So I would just ask that you support it, because I don't know anything that we've ever done in my time that we told the state, don't pass a law unless you give us money to hire the
We're not
police
saying
officers.
don't pass law without money, we're saying that the financial aspect is an important
But it's all financial aspects. See, it's city property they're stealing. Cities throughout the state of California, San Jose, in San Bernardino, Long Beach, the other day, Dennis,
Well-
they had 19 manhole covers stolen in Long Beach, and they didn't have any way to capture these individuals who are stealing public property. Cities are asking for this, the state legislature is responding. City attorney, you have something to add?
What's the position of the police department, LAPD?
I'm not sure.
One thing-
I spoke with them and they support it.
The one thing that I would add, though, is that there are existing regulations that local law enforcement is already expected to enforce, but the way that they are written it requires much more footwork on the part of the police officers to go from place to place to place to make sure that the requirements are being followed. This law is actually attempting to make it easier for fewer people to enforce the existing laws by requiring the mandatory reporting on behalf of the junk dealers to the local law enforcement, and also allowing for a paper trail to be created through the use of checks as opposed to cash transactions.
Okay, so they're going to report it to the local police agency.
Right, they're supposed to report it either monthly, or if there's an ongoing investigation, then they have to report it weekly
And who do they report that to in the police?
to the local law enforcement agency
Okay.
that is in charge of their area.
This should actually help.
Well, see, here's the point, and I come from LAPD where I spent almost 40 years. Who's going to handle it? Is it the patrol officer, the desk officer? Who actually, without the police department's connection, all these reports come into the police department. Does it go to Chief Bratton's office? Where does it go? You got a department of 9,000 personnel. You got over 20 divisions. So I'm a junk dealer. I'm going to send my paperwork to LAPD. So it goes to LAPD. Who's going to be responsible within the police department to file this? I mean, that's a process. When you get FI cards, R&I handles it. Is R&I going to handle this? Is the metal people going to handle it? Who's going to handle it within the department?
Captain Williams' crew. May I suggest, Mr. Chair, because Mr. Zine always has very good questions.
Well, no,
that
it's
when
a
this
matter of
comes to
practicality.
council,
It's a matter of practicality.
I understand that, Dennis, but when it comes to council, that's LAPD to be there. Okay? One is better than none.
Without having a full review to make sure that we have it done properly.
Well, it's affecting horribly other parts of the
Let's bring it to
district.
council, then.
We'll ask them to come to
So
council.
here's what I'm saying. I like the law, it makes sense. The problem is, you're telling the police department, you're going to get all these things from the junk dealers. We don't know how many we have. We need to find out how many junk dealers we have in the city. You're going to get all this paper from all this, whatever they're going to turn in. fingerprints and thumbprints and cards, et cetera, who in the police department is going to be responsible to handle it? And where do the junk dealers turn it into? The local division? They turn it into Parker Center? We need to have the department come forward, and if it's fine to do it in council, to say, and then they're going to say, you know what? We don't have anybody to handle
No,
it.
they're going to say, we're going to take charge of this, because we don't like to see city property stolen.
You're missing the point. The point is they're going to sit there in a corner, or is they going to have the personnel? Because then the police department's going to say, we need someone to process this paperwork.
Well, here's my two suggestions, and why don't we add, the soft pedaling language that was suggested by our CLA on any assistance that wouldn't tank our support of it in Sacramento, but should there be money that we would, like to see that, but it's not conditional on whether or not the state pays for it, because it's in our own financial interest to make sure this stops, even if we hired a couple people ourselves in our own budget, and they could
Which is
make...
good, which is all good and dandy.
Right,
I just
and then
wanna
the
make
second
sure-
piece is, let's make sure that the LAPD is there when it comes to full council, and they can answer Mr. Zine's question. I'll either forward it as a recommendation from the chair now, if you want to stay neutral on it, or if you want to...
Well, I'm not going to say neutral, but I'd like the
Okay.
city attorney's office or someone to contact the department to say,
Let's bring them there and give
who
us
do you want this paper
implementation
to work to
plan.
go to? Because someone's going to have to notify these dealers.
We'll contact.
So we'll instruct as part of...
Well, Mr. Labange, I don't think you're going to contact
We'll
them.
instruct the LAPD as part of this to be there, and make sure the CLA works to make sure they're there.
And what process that they want to put in place, and if they can do it with existing personnel, or they're going to say, we can't do it unless you give us this, that, and the other.
Okay.
We got 22 officers at the airport we could maybe use for this assignment, which would probably be better used than the 22 at the airport.
Okay, sounds good. We'll do that then as a majority unanimous approval as amended. Thank you, Mr. Labange. Good to see you here in committee.
Labange is assaulting me now.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your work.
And you did want to add AB 844 to this as
Yeah,
well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
please.
terrific.
Item 4, please.
Item 4 is a CLA report relative to the city's position on requesting the California Transportation Commission to distribute 75% of Proposition 1B funds to Southern California and devote a larger share to the Los Angeles area for air quality improvement pursuant to Resolution Han Garcetti. Alex Moya with the CLA's office is here for a report.
All right.
Good
Please.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Although the Los Angeles and Long Beach port complex handles 85% of the state's 76% of the exported cargo of the state, the CTC has not rewarded Los Angeles with an appropriate proportion of resources under Proposition 1B. The Southern California Leadership Council has worked with state, regional, and county county agencies to identify 40 projects with a cost of $10 billion that need to be completed within the Southern California and San Diego trade corridors over the next 10 years. In addition, currently, Southern California has submitted an application containing projects that require 85% of funds under Proposition 1B's Trade Corridor Improvement Fund. The region was awarded only 60% of resources. This is the current status of Proposition 1B in Los Angeles.
Okay. I think we all agree on that, especially when we look at those percentages. It's not, was not designed for splitting up into all the states, so I'm certainly in support of Ms. Hahn's motion as the seconder. Any questions you have on it?
That's fine.
Okay. Without objection, we'll go ahead and move that forward. And last but not least,
Item
Green
5,
Line.
CLA report relative to the city's position on SB 1722 Oropesa, which would create a Green Line Construction Authority with the sole purpose of extending the Metro Green Line 2 miles to Los Angeles International Airport pursuant to Resolution Rosendahl-Gruel. The CLA analyst who has prepared this report is not currently available, so I'm going to very poorly
Well, why don't we
summarize
wait
the
on
report.
that poor summary, and we'll have Patricia, from Metro come forward to speak to us as well, who I understand has taken an opposed position on this. You can tell us exactly why.
Patricia Torres Bruno with Metro Government Relations. Actually, the Metro Board took a work with author position.
Okay.
Our legislative committee of the board took an opposed position, but when it went to a full board, they changed it to work with author. So, mainly our concerns with the bill are that, first, we believe it's premature to establish a Green Line Construction Authority at this point because there's no identified funding for the project. I understand in the bill it does identify the City of LA as being responsible for paying for the EIR, but beyond that, there's no identified funding. Historically, when we have when the other construction authorities that exist today, the Gold Line and the Expo Light Rail Construction Authority, they had identified funding when they were established. And so this is not the case now. And so that kind of leads into my second point, which is if it's established and doesn't have any identified funding, then will it compete? We are concerned that it will compete for funding at the state and federal level for dollars with the region's priority projects, including Expo, the West Side Extension, the Regional Connector, Crenshaw Corridor, the Canoga North-South. We have a list of projects that we're trying to move forward. The Metro is actually studying other alternatives that connect to the airport. We don't view the Green Line as the only option to connecting the rest of the rail network to the airport. And currently we have identified the Crenshaw Corridor project as potentially connecting the rest of the region to the airport. And the board has identified...
That's a line that goes down Crenshaw, so it would have to jog west or something? Or
no, we're currently in the EIR process. We're doing the alternatives analysis right now, so we haven't identified an exact alignment, but we own the harbor subdivision, which goes along the airport and could have a connection into the airport, which goes into my other concern about the legislation, because the legislation would require us to turn over our assets and our property in trust to the authority. So it would conflict with our current efforts to try to move this project forward.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the testimony. And Greg Asher is here from CD11 as well to say a few words. Oh, we got the airport in the house, everything.
We always need you, Michael.
What does the airport want?
They want it.
Hi, Greg
Hi.
Asher
Hi,
with
Greg.
Councilman Rosendahl staff, CD11. And I'm really here to answer any questions. I think both of you have heard the councilman talk about this project a number of times. Of course, we agree with the CLA report, which I provided a copy, but we think that it addresses all the issues that are brought up by Metro. I can
Specifically, that language has been incorporated this time that we added last year is the amended version so that it wouldn't compete for funds not available to those other Crenshaw Prairie.
Yes, actually,
corridor
with the
lines.
difference, the council approved this
Right.
last year when it was AB 889. When we worked with the author, Senator Oropeza, this year we incorporated that language in the bill so that we feel we didn't need it, but we're happy if
But
you
it's
want
there.
it.
No. If it's there, that's just the point I wanted to put on the record.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. And, the Green Line does enjoy a lot of support. Everybody from the Sierra Club, LA Chamber of Commerce, cities of El Segundo, Hawthorne, Manhattan Beach. We'll hear from LAWA in a moment. And over, I think, 50 elected officials have signed the handy-dandy Green Line Coalition report that Councilman Rosendahl likes to hand out. This is entirely a City of LA project within the jurisdiction of the City of LA and connects to the city's airport. So we feel it's very much in the interest of the city to move forward with this project. And in addition, the councilman recognizes this is a complementary project to the other rail lines mentioned by Metro. The plans that we've worked on with Metro and LAWA show that the Crenshaw line and the Harbor Subdivision and the Green Line would all share a corridor, and so it doesn't preclude anything from happening in the future. And I believe in the current draft long-range transit plan, the Crenshaw line is actually not forecast to open until the year 2025. And so then we wouldn't, if we waited for that, obviously the airport would not be connected into the rail network for many, many years, which is one of the primary reasons for going ahead with the Green Line, since it's really only about 1.5 miles to 2 miles short of the airport.
Well, I know what I'm doing for my 54th birthday.
All
right.
That old?
I will be when it opens.
Oh, when it opens. Thought you were talking recent.
Mr. Molina, would you like to? Thank you very much, Greg. We appreciate it. And anything from the airport?
Greetings.
Greetings.
Mike Molina, Senior Director of Government Affairs for Los Angeles World Airports. LAWA supports the motion, and should SB 1722 be signed into law, we look forward to working with the authority.
Great. Good stuff. I hope that you didn't come all the way from the airport just for that.
I had some coffee while I was here.
Good, good. See some friends?
See some friends.
Well, with that, if there's no objection then, Mr. Zine?
They're announcing that.
Got some big news. He just learned John Edwards is endorsing Barack Obama.
Should I tell Garcetti?
All right, with that, I want to make sure he's conscious of vote right now, so we'll wait. No, don't worry about it? Okay. So with that, unanimously, we will approve
Thanks.
As
I'm not done, Mr.
suggested.
Chair.
Oh, we're almost there. Yes, Mr. Zion.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Chair.
good.
I had a
What's the big news?
breaking news from the mayor's office,
What's happening?
from the vice mayor.
Be scared.
Ms. Bruno, where do you live?
Silver Lake.
Silver Lake. Do you ever go to the airport?
Yes, I do.
Do you find the traffic congestion a mess?
Yes, of course I do.
So you live in Mr. Garcetti's district,
No, Labange's district.
Labange's district? Okay. Have you ever gone down to see where the green line curves to El Segundo and abruptly stops where they have the
Yes, I am
port?
familiar with that, yeah.
Have you ever gone down to look at it?
No, I've only seen it in photos.
Okay, I've been down there, and I didn't believe that it abruptly ended until I went down and
No,
actually
it does,
stopped.
it does abruptly end, yeah.
And I looked up there and I said, how illogical for them to build this subway, this green line off the 90, this is the 90, isn't it? The 105, into El Segundo and abruptly stop into the airport. And I've heard different rumors why they didn't go into the airport. They didn't want additional front sight. The taxi drivers, the super shuttle people, whatever the case may be, they wanted to keep gridlock and chaos in the airport. So if the Metro Board now supports this or doesn't support this?
Well, again, there's the concern about the competition for funding
Right.
and our own efforts to try to do a connection to the airport. And I just want to clarify that I don't think it's in the bill that won't compete for funding for projects.
So what if it does compete for projects? If we look at the priorities of projects, we talk about Subway to the Sea and all these different projects, wouldn't we think that the airport ingress and egress would be a priority for this region, since
Of
it is
course.
so congested?
Yes.
So if it's a 2-mile stretch, I know Mr. Rosenthal strongly supports this. I know for me to go to the airport from the West Sacramento Valley, it is absolutely uncomfortable. So for me to look at this to say, we'll pay for the EIR, and for the airport to support it, they have a lot of money. And for the Metro, which is our public transit system here in Los Angeles, to say, we want to move people as quickly as possible, as something that can be done in a relatively short period of time without taking away existing right-of-way. As I understand, it's going to be above ground, continuing that path into the airport on that leg that abruptly ends. I just don't see why Metro wouldn't say this is a priority for the people of this region to get into that over-congested
Well, I
airport.
think we want to continue working with the council member and the Senator Opesa's office to add amendments to the bill that say that the airport's going to pay for the project, if that is in case what's going to happen, and that it's not going to compete with the priorities that the board has chosen. And
But if it were to compete with the projects, where's their order of priorities? The airport versus the Crenshaw, or the airport
Well,
versus something else?
Crenshaw is in the long-range transportation plan, and it has committed funding from the board. The Green Line extension is in the long-range transportation plan, but it's not on the committed, it doesn't have identified funding for it.
That's what I'm trying to find out why, when it's so sensible and logical, why that wouldn't take a higher priority and something for 2025 when Mr. Garcetti's a member of Association of Retired Persons. Why they wouldn't look at that to say, this is something reasonable, logical, help this gridlock off the 105, off the 405 to get in and out. Because I went down there and looked, and I was absolutely amazed that whoever stopped it when it was being built, there was some obviously political reason why they stopped it. It wasn't because of some hazardous situation or some kind of construction flaw, but that leg sits right there that would go directly in. And I commend Mr. Rosendahl for pushing this for not only his district, District 11, but for everybody who has to go to the airport. And it's an uncomfortable experience to go to the airport because it's so congested. And the airport wants to spend money to improve that facility. So I just think that Metro needs to realize the significance and the importance that thousands and thousands of people, if not millions, go to that airport constantly.
And I think, I mean, I can't really speak to, I wasn't here when the decisions were made to stop it at where it ends today.
Neither was I.
So I can't really speak to why, the board hasn't chosen it as a higher priority, but it is something of importance to us, and I know that our CEO has met with Councilman Rosendahl and has agreed to look into establishing like a task force with the key stakeholders to talk about funding for the project. And that doesn't necessarily require a construction authority. That can happen now.
And what's the estimated cost for that?
I'm sorry?
The estimated cost for that 2-mile stretch? For the Green Line
I
to the
don't-
airport?
The airport. Is airport.
Mr. Molina, do you know?
I don't.
Does anybody know?
Between $200 and $250 million.
To finish that 2-mile project? That's not a lot of money when you talk about transit projects. I think $300 million paid for the orange line in the San Fernando Valley.
I'd be happy to, take back to the board amendments, and work with the senator's office with amendments that says that the airport's committed to paying for it and that it won't compete, with some of the other priority projects. And
Just on that point, so you said the language is in there, you're saying it's not,
I don't
should we reiterate it? Just, is there any downside to reiterating it to make sure it's there? Okay. That way you can have the assurance, and it seems in line with what you're saying. So why don't we just make sure we'll add, with that, the same language we did last year on that to make sure that it's, we just say should be included be for funds not available to, and then we have the Crenshaw Prairie Corridor, Expo Line Phase 2, Orange Line extensions in the San Fernando Valley, et cetera. Okay, Mr. Molina?
I represent the Valley. Orange Line's important, and I would say that's a priority, but the airport would probably be a higher priority if I start looking at the priorities of transportation, the number of people that use. Do you folks pay, are you folks going to pay for it, Mike?
Well, let me answer that. Mike Molina, once again, we would certainly support the adding of that language, because at LABA, we want to see light rail come to the airport, whether it's Crenshaw or the Harbor Line or the Green Line. That's important to us. As has been envisioned in this bill, there seems to be the need to identify funding for the EIR that needs to take place, first and foremost.
Right.
We need to go through that process to identify whether or not there is the ability for the airport to pay for the entire thing. That would necessitate federal approval. We'd have to go to the FAA to discuss it. But we first have to look at the project itself, where the stops are going to be, where the terminus is, so that we can go to the FAA and fight for it, because we certainly want to see the extension of that light rail. So I think in the vision of the bill as Senator Oropeza has written it, it's the identification of funding for the EIR, which LAWA is happy to participate in pending federal approval, and I think Mr. Rosendahl has already identified funding as well. So in the meantime, in the immediacy, we need to find money for the EIR so that we can study it, and then we get to the next section of how to pay for the whole thing.
Do we know if the original plan called for that to go into the airport and it was stopped somehow in the process?
What I have researched, the original plan did have 2 additional stops, one at Century and Aviation and one at what we call today Lot C. And
It would go into the airport,
right, at Lot C.
and that was the original design.
That's correct.
And somehow it got scrapped. Yes. It got scrapped and ended abruptly as it curves into El Segundo.
For any number of reasons that today continue to confound people, whether it was a lack of money or it was an issue of a perceived interference with the flight path. There are a variety of reasons that are being used today now, 18 years later, to say why it ended. But
Are any of those people still around that were involved in that?
at MTA?
Oh, at MTA, I could find out.
Or
I'm
through
sure there was.
Caltrans, since it's off the 105? I mean, to look at the history to say, where did it get short-circuited? And maybe that short circuit was an issue that had some realism, or it was some lobbyist that decided we don't want to do this.
Possibly to answer the question once after all, we can add some narrative in the EIR. Should the bill go through and we have the EIR, we can add that.
I think it'd be important, but people who haven't gone down there just look at it. You look at it, it absolutely blows your mind that they wouldn't complete that project. And then now we're only talking a 2-mile stretch to alleviate thousands and thousands of cars and get commuters into that airport.
All right, so with that, let's do it as amended. Let's go ahead and adopt that objection. And thank you all very much.
No objection, Mr.
No
President.
objection, all right.
Mr. Chairman.
This meeting,
Public
now for
comment?
general public comment. Going once, going twice,
Gone.
gone. This meeting is adjourned. Thanks.